My husband Dan is 28. I'm 28. My best friend Emily is 28. Her husband Scott is 30. And we're all connected in different ways. So let me give you a little background on each of them. We've known each other since high school, but we weren't really friends back then. We were more like acquaintances, just people we'd seen in the hallways. And we reunited at our high school reunion, which was, I think, about 4 or 5 years after we graduated, which is kind of a blur, but it was definitely a couple years after we graduated. Emily's been my best friend since I was a little kid, and we've known each other since kindergarten, so we've spent a really long time together, and we've gone through a lot of things: school awkwardness, first crushes during puberty. Our friendship is still going strong, and that's something I'm grateful for. Emily and Scott have been married for a year. They dated for 3 years before they got married, so they've been together a little bit longer than Dan, and I have been together a little bit longer than Dan, and I have been married, but not nearly as long as we've been together. Overall, they met at work, which is pretty common. I guess Scott seems like a good guy. He's always been very protective of Emily. Now, our relationship has gotten a little complicated. Dan has known me and Emily since high school, but it doesn't know either of us very well. It's safe to say that he's not a friend of ours. She's more of an acquaintance of the kind that I've come to know. There's not a lot of beef or anything between us. We've just never really hung out with the same people. It's just basically the same for everyone as well. Our relationships. And I know it's a bit of a tangent. It's important to understand those relationships for the rest of the story. And that's where the subtle negativity comes in. And this is something that I didn't really realize until after the fact, that Dan has a habit of making little remarks and jokes that are actually kind of mean. For example, he might say something about my weight. Like if I wanted a second helping of dessert, he'd say, "You must want it. You know how easily you gain weight." He might also comment on something I'd cooked, like it's good for your cooking, but he'd emphasize a point to show that he didn't think what I'd cooked was all that good. If I tried to say something, he'd just say I was too sensitive or that I couldn't take a joke, and it wasn't something that happened every day, so I just listened to it, which was always easier than arguing. I realize now that what's worse is that he'll compare me to other women. Sometimes it's celebrities like, "Wow, that actress is so pretty, you should try wearing your hair like that," or "She's got a great body, you should try working out more." Sometimes it's not even celebrities, it's women we know, like acquaintances or even coworkers, and he'll be like, "Oh, my office is so organized. XYZ, I want you to be like that too." I just laughed it off or changed the subject because I didn't want to seem insecure or needy, but those comments stick with you, and over time you start to question yourself. And I started to wonder if he really wasn't happy with me, if I wasn't good enough for him, what seemed like a great marriage, great friends. But the undercurrent of negativity from Dan was there, and I basically ignored it. And I guess I was in denial. But then something happened that I couldn't ignore anymore. And that's what I'm going to talk about next. It was a Friday night. Dan and I had both had a very busy week, and we decided to have a night just the two of us. We ordered takeout, put on some comfy clothes, opened a bottle of wine, and we ended up getting drunk, which in retrospect was probably a mistake. But at the time, we were just trying to unwind and celebrate the week we'd had. We were sitting on the sofa, feeling very drunk, and somehow of it, we got on the topic of celebrities. I don't even remember how it started, but we ended up playing this game originally just for fun, a silly assumption that I really don't think did any harm. I went first. I named my five. I think it was Chris Hemsworth, Idris, Ella, the usual suspects. Dan laughed and agreed with my choices. Then it was his turn. He easily named 4 celebrities, but then he got stuck. He thought about it for a long time, and I started teasing him, saying, "Oh, it looks like I'm winning. You can't even come up with 5." I was just joking around, trying to keep the mood light, and he kept struggling with it. And then all of a sudden, he said, "Okay, well, my 5th, I might want to get together with Emily at some point." And I was totally shocked, and I didn't really know what to say. And my brain kind of froze up, and I was trying to laugh it off because I thought he might have been joking. But despite the fact that I was pretty drunk, I couldn't find any humor in it. Wait a minute. Are you serious? I asked him, "You're supposed to name celebrities, remember?" "I'm serious. I mean, I've always had a bit of a crush on Emily, even in high school." He went on to say that he used to think of me as Emily's less glamorous sidekick. Ouch, that hurts. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I didn't say anything. I just stood up and walked to my bedroom and went to bed. I didn't even try to argue or explain why I was upset. I was just so hurt and confused when I woke up the next morning. I was hungover, had a headache, and felt awful. It wasn't a nightmare. It was something that actually happened. And Dan seemed completely unaffected. He was in the kitchen eating cereal, just like any other Saturday morning. I couldn't just let it go. I had to say something, so I walked into the kitchen and confronted him. I asked him if he remembered what he had said about Emily. He just looked at me, still chewing his cereal, and said yes. "It's all true. That's it. No apology, no embarrassment, nothing, no apology." No embarrassment. Nothing. I was stunned. I asked him, "Do you still find Emily attractive?" Maybe had just had a moment of drunken stupidity, but he'll realize how bad it is now, wouldn't even hesitate. I don't even remember what is Ed, but if now I was screaming, and I was angry and hurt and confused. His reaction was worse. He told me to accept reality and move on. He said he loves me more than Emily, I'm his soulmate, but that objectively he still finds Emily more attractive. He said that if it was purely a physical attraction, he would have picked her over me. Then he had the nerve to say it was normal to feel that way, and then he went even further. He said if I didn't want an honest answer, I shouldn't have asked the question in the first place. He said I should just go with the flow when he can't even name 5 famous people. Dan went to work, and I thought he would calm down and realize he had screwed up. But after a while, he called me, and I wanted him to apologize, but he didn't. Instead, he went on, saying that my jealousy and drama was ruining our marriage, and that I needed a safe, fun wife, not someone who freaked out over a harmless joke. I've been crying all day, and I feel so alone. Usually, in situations like this, I would confide in Dan and Emily, but Dan is the root of the problem, and I can't talk to Emily about it yet because it's her problem, and I don't even know how to explain it. So I just stay in bed and feel completely lost and miserable. She's my best friend, and she could see that something was wrong with me. So I called her and told her everything. Emily was pissed off. She was pissed off for me, and that's exactly what I needed. She wanted to call Dan right away and tell him to give her a piece of his mind, and I had to stop her. I told her, no, don't do this. It's only going to make it worse. And then Emily mentioned something that gave me an idea, and she reminded me of something a few years ago when a guy called her out on the street. Scott was Scott, and he beat the guy up. He's always been very protective of her. It wasn't a serious fight, but it was enough to get the guy to leave Emily alone. I asked Emily if she'd agree to set up a double date, and if during the date I could repeat Scott's comments about her in front of him. Emily said yes, or at least she didn't even hesitate, and we just started laughing, imagining what would happen. It was kind of twisted humor, but it felt good to have a plan, to feel like I was taking back control. I called him and told him I was sorry for overreacting, that I was being too sensitive, and I understood that he was just kidding. That night, I made his favorite dinner and tried to make everything seem as normal as possible. I told him that I'd found out from Emily that she'd actually had a crush on him for a long time, and that she'd love to go on a date with him someday. I knew it was bad, but I told him he should probably bring it up on the date. The night before the double date, he spent hours getting ready. He kept trying on different dresses and asking me which one was more glamorous. He said a lot of things about wanting to impress Emily, completely ignoring the fact that he was treating me with. We were all dressed up, and Emily looked stunning as always. Scott was in a suit, and Dan, from the moment we got to the restaurant, Dan was trying really hard. He was very attentive to Emily. We sat down and ordered drinks and talked a little bit, and I was trying to act normal, but inside I was nervous. And after a couple of glasses of wine, we were all feeling a little bit more relaxed. And I brought it up and I said, "Hey, remember that boring night that Dan and I played that night and we had a little bit of fun?" I said, "Hey, remember that boring celebrity game that Dan and I played the other night?" He tried to sound casual, like it was just a funny story, and Emily and Scott followed suit and asked me what I was talking about, and I explained the rules, and then I said, "Okay," and then it turned to Dana and said, "It's your turn." And he didn't hesitate and looked right at Emily and said, "Well, I'm sure I'll have to say Emily, and that's it, no prompting. He said it with a smug look on his face, as if he was so proud of himself. Scott was seething with anger, and you could see the anger in his eyes. Emily and I pretended to be shocked. We exchanged glances like, oh my God, I can't believe he said that. But secretly, we were both waiting for Scott to explode. Scott leaned forward and in a low voice said to Dan, "You need to apologize to everyone here right now, and then we'll leave." But Dan, being Dan, he refused to apologize. He said, "Why should I?" He even looked right at me. Some people just can't accept the truth. That's when Scott exploded here, H down, and grabbed Danby the collar of his shirt, pulled him to O standing position, and then punched him in the face. There was a loud thud. Dan collapsed. He fell back into his chair, and then on to the floor. Thankfully, Noon called the police because the restaurant didn't want any bad press. All they wanted was for us to get out of the restaurant as soon as we were out of the restaurant. The thing didn't calm down. Dan was bleeding a lot. His nose was obviously broken and crooked, and blood was everywhere, but even with his broken nose hadn't backed down. He started yelling at Emily and calling us cowards, and he quickly realized it was a setup. He was yelling and screaming. Because of his nose, his voice was distorted, and he was cursing at me, calling me pathetic and jealous and just downright. Scott was still watching him, and he warned him one more word, and you'd be in the hospital for days. Scott was a guy, and at that moment he was really scary. I knew I couldn't go home with Dan. I was afraid of what he would do, and to be honest, I couldn't stand to be near him. They offered to take me to a hotel, and I accepted. On the way to the hotel, we explained the whole plan to Scott in the car. We told him about Dan's demeanor and what he had said and how we were set up, and how we had set them up. Scott listened and said that Dan deserved it and that he wasn't sorry at all, and that he was totally on our side. He called me horrible person and said that he had to go to the emergency room by himself to get this broken nose plastered as if it was my fault. They said that what I had done was disgusting and said that he wanted to get a divorce as soon as possible. He described my behavior as psychotic and childish, and of course he had to add an last insult. He said I would never find anyone as good as him again, and that I would regret it for the rest of my life. When I woke up the next morning in my hotel room, I was completely sober. Everything I had done had made me feel sick. I felt a mess. I had orchestrated an incident where my husband had his nose broken in public. I had lied to him, manipulated him, set him up, and even though he had said and done horrible things, I knew what I had done was wrong. I started thinking about Dan and how much he hates hospitals. He absolutely hates them, and how he can't stand the sight of blood. He gets nauseous and faints. And knowing that he had to go to the emergency room alone with a broken and bleeding nose makes me sick. Not because I feel bad for him, but because I know that I'm one of the causes of his pain, and that makes me uncomfortable, no matter how much pain he might be in. I knew I'd screwed up, and I wasn't going to pretend that I was completely innocent in all of this, and after discussing it with Emily, we decided that we needed to apologize to Dan and Scott. I know an apology won't undo anything, but it's a start, and we're both worried that Dan is going to sue us, which is a scary thought, but we'll have to deal with it if it does happen. And I'd like to clear up a few more things about Scott because I've seen a few comments about him being violent, and he's actually been in anger management therapy for a while now. And that whole thing that Emily mentioned about him punching the guy who called her, it happened a few years ago, and it's not like we're going to be able to do anything about it, but we're going to have to. When they first started dating, things weren't as bad as they sound. He's a good guy, and he wouldn't hurt anyone who didn't deserve it. I know it sounds like I'm justifying his actions, but I'm just trying to give you the full picture. So that's where I'm at right now, planning an apology, preparing for possible legal action, and trying to figure out how to make a fresh start. It's a lot, but I know I'm going to go through it. Thanks for all the feedback, even the harsh stuff. It helped me see things more clearly. Updated to the point where Emily and I went to Dan's house, which is actually my house, but took up a few of my things. I needed some new clothes and a few essentials to get me through the next few days. And at the hotel, Dan let us in, which surprised me, but he looked upset and didn't say a word. His nose was still bandaged, swollen and bruised, and looked in pain. I tried to be sincere, even though it was hard. I was hoping he'd apologize too and say something about his own behavior, but he didn't. He just stood there staring at us, and then he told us to leave. And he said he wasn't interested in our apologies because the damage was already done. And he said he'd given us a chance and we'd screwed it up. And he made it very clear he wouldn't want me anymore. And he'd definitely not be going on a date with Emily. As if she'd want to go on a date with him after all this? I tried to tell him we weren't there to ask for a second chance, we were just trying to apologize for our behavior, but he wouldn't listen and slammed the door. In our faces she said we didn't need to apologize. He said he'd be happy to teach the other disrespectful guys the same lesson. That's the only way they're going to learn. And then he said that if Dan's parents couldn't teach him to respect women, he accepted our apology, but he seems to be okay with what he did. Soon successful apology, one failed ending. I guess that's what I'm going to do now. I'm looking for a lawyer. I need to start dealing with the impending divorces that I'll regret it, but he's not going to stop me. He also told me to pack up the rest of my stuff by the end of the week, or he's going to donate it to charity or just throw it out. There's even a voicemail. Whatsoever, it's all there's anger, threats, pleading, guilt, and imminent. He's blaming me for everything. The next, he's begging me to come back, saying he'll change as she has a spare room. And she said I could put everything in her storage room until I find my own place. I'm so grateful for her friendship. I don't know what I'd do without her, but most people say I'm doing the right thing and wish me luck. They see through his bullshit. And thankfully I don't. To Vinali saw that Dan was a total loser. I mean, who would say that to their wife the way he did? I realized that I was better than him in the first place.